You fix the passive learning problem by adding activities, but your course clients still aren't able to do the thing. I'm going to tell you why. I'm Dr. Catrina Mitchum, and I've been designing and redesigning courses online since 2009. Okay, so your typical course does the learn all the concepts. And so this is the information delivery in like modules 1 through 3. And then module 4 is, okay, let's apply it. So one big project, or watch all 6 videos and then do the worksheet, or complete the course and then implement in your business. These kinds of things can feel logical because they do need information and knowledge in order to be able to do something with it, right? But this model fails for a few reasons. One, covered this in the last video, but working memory can't hold that much till later. So if you taught 6 different concepts across 3 modules, and they're supposed to remember all 6 of those concepts when they go to apply it, they are not going to remember them all. Working memory can hold up to 9 things for 20 to 30 seconds. So if we haven't pulled it from working memory into long-term memory, we have a problem, right? And that's why later is happening too far past the working memory capacity because they can't remember what they're supposed to apply, right? 2, information didn't transfer into long-term memory because they weren't applying things. Transfer requires active processing. So watching, reading, what you're doing right now, right? Like that's not necessarily passive. You might pick up a nugget or two from what I'm saying, but unless you are really applying it, whether that's engaging with it by thinking about how it applies to your own course or actually doing something with it in the moment, then it's considered passive. So when you get to that kind of later application, there is very, very little, if anything, stored to retrieve, right? Sometimes, when we're watching a video or when we're reading something, we are actively thinking about it. But how many times have you read a page or two and gotten to the end and been like, I literally have no idea what I just read, right? It's because you weren't engaging with the material enough to be able to pull it into that longer term memory. 3, separated learning. So when we separate the learning from the doing, creates isolated knowledge, not necessarily usable skills, right? Things that are going to lead to change. And they may not necessarily have to be concrete skills like attaching a file to an email. They might be skills like calming yourself down, right? They can be squishier things and still be skills, things that they do with the information. So when you acquire knowledge separately from applying things, the brain kind of stores it as information. Things I know about X, right? And that might make you like super fantastic at trivia, right? Because you've got all this knowledge stored. However, that things I know about X needs to file away under things I can do with X in order to really create change. And that's sort of because, when we talk about learning and memory and knowledge, we're talking about information retrieval, right? So in order to be able to use the things I know about X, you need to be able to retrieve it, right? That's how you know that it's in your memory. And the retrieval cues for knowing something, like being asked a question in trivia, are not the same as the retrieval cues for doing something, like apply this information. And that's because one is kind of like regurgitation, like I know this thing. The second one involves thinking about that information in ways that apply to different situations, right? Like that's when you know you really learned it, when you can apply it across different situations. For example, if you can explain email marketing, that is knowledge retrieval, right? You can pull that information out. But if you can't write a welcome email, you're not able to retrieve the action, right? You're also not really very deeply able to explain to other people about email marketing, right? You should be able to take what you know about email marketing and apply it to welcome emails across different industries, right? Across different contexts. Takes an extra level of kind of critical thinking and application helps us do that. So, number 4 means that if you're delaying the application, so delaying taking action on the knowledge and trying to use it, there's not really any feedback on whether or not they're understanding. If they misunderstand a concept, there's no application to reveal the misunderstanding. And if, let's say that was concept number 2, and if concepts 3 through 6 build on that, they're going to get to the bigger application in module 4 and everything's wrong, right? They don't know what they're doing or how to use the things that they've got. They're lost, they're overwhelmed, and they can't figure out where it broke. Then they have to go back and try to relearn it. But if there's still no feedback loop built in, then they still don't know what they've done wrong. Okay, the last one, number 5, is that attaching kind of learning strategies on the separated content doesn't actually fit the problem. It's kind of a band-aid that people assume is just gonna work. So what that might look like. If you hear passive learning doesn't work, you might add learning strategies like highlight key points that you read, take notes in your workbook, reflect on how this applies to you, review this material before moving on. This still leans into the content first, give them the workbook, and it's a problem because the strategies are still separated from the learning, and they are putting a lot of the onus on knowing how to engage with content on the learner. That's a learned skill. Some people do it naturally, but for most people, that is a learned skill, engaging with it, especially if it's brand new, or in some cases, if it is a situation where they're not entirely invested in it because they don't understand how it connects to the thing they are invested in doing. So why these strategies don't work? Random highlighting is not processing. How many times have you highlighted something that you read, whether that was digital or on paper, and ended up like highlighting most of the page because you are actively trying to remember the things and you think highlighting is what is going to help you remember. So the problem is that highlight what's important. When someone is learning something new, they don't know what is important yet. And so it's normal to kind of highlight everything or highlight nothing even. So if you're highlighting without a specific purpose, it is busy work. There's no like cognitive processing that's happening that is pulling out the information that they're going to need. And so information still isn't transferring into our long-term memory. Another one is that generic reflection prompts after the fact. So things like watch all the videos in modules 1 through 3 and then reflect on how will you apply this, right? That kind of generic prompt is a problem because they can't remember what this is. There's too much this, right, to think about how to apply it. And there hasn't been, oftentimes, any direct instruction on ways it might be applied. So by the time you get there, your working memory has already dumped some of the information. So they're not able to reflect on all of it. And it is harder to pull multiple concepts into a situation if you haven't worked through them on a smaller scale, right? Separate workbooks or separated workbooks also don't work. Part of the problem is the platforms that we're in, right? Nothing is built to do the work that learning online really takes. But download the workbook and complete it after the module. Okay, when? Later. They've forgotten. What you're talking about in the videos isn't directly connected to the thing that they're doing, right? You're not mentioning, go do this, and then showing them what that workbook looks like and how the information applies to that activity. So if the workbook is asking them to apply concepts from videos they watched days ago, they've got nothing to pull from. They're probably going to have to go rewatch the video. So we still have this separation of content consumption and then action. Now, sometimes we can have the illusion of active learning, right? And this looks like there's a workbook. We've got reflection questions, but those are still passive consuming. Consume first, maybe do something later. And so a lot of people feel like, oh, I fixed the passive problem. It's not just a collection of videos. I'm actually asking them to do something. You still have the separation problem if you haven't designed a lesson in a way that they're getting the information and doing kind of on a almost a rolling basis. People need to be able to retrieve information more than once. And so that's why chunking things down and having smaller pieces helps the learning to actually stick and work and be applied later. So, what actually does work? So, when we passively consume things, we are encoding something usually, right? We can remember some of the things from something that we watched, but not enough to use it. When you watch or read or listen to something passively, most of that information doesn't enter long-term memory. And if it does, the encoding is usually pretty shallow. So it's surface level. The connections aren't very strong. It's often enough for us to recognize, oh yeah, I remember hearing about that, or I remember reading that, but not enough to actually retrieve it and then apply it. So how do I actually do this? How do I actually use that information to do something with it? Active processing helps us to encode things deeply, and that means that it's in there good enough to be able to use it. So when you're engaging actively with information, the encoding is deeper. We're connecting it to other knowledge, we're tying it to other concepts, we're practicing things. That is what's going to make it strong enough to retrieve it when we need it across all the different concepts, right? So usable, not just recognizable. So when we have courses where we're separating things, where we're separating consuming from engaging, we end up with shallow encoding. So a student watches a video about subject lines passively, right? They're doing nothing but watching, listening. The shallow encoding might be subject lines should be specific and create curiosity, right? I know I can't resist clicking on a curiosity inducing subject line. Later, when they're sitting down to write it, they might think, I know there was something about subject lines, but they can't retrieve the specifics strongly enough to actually apply them. So that kind of connection is too weak to be able to retrieve the information well enough to apply it. We see something similar when we have kind of the generic reflection questions, right? Things like, what did you learn from this video? That's generic. Students think subject lines need to be specific and incite curiosity. That is just repeating what they heard, which is still shallow processing, right? Regurgitation isn't real processing of how something is working or can be applied. And so it doesn't strengthen that connection. Okay, so the moment you've all been waiting for. What does deepen encoding? That is targeted engagement. So things like write a subject line for this specific audience on this specific problem and doing it while they're watching the video, right? You can do things like suggest that they pause, do things like give them sentence starters, because now they're processing. They're starting to think about not just this needs to be specific and make them curious. They're starting to connect specific and curious to who their audience is and what they're writing about. And so this is a deeper processing, right? This is when you hear people talk about like critical thinking skills, this is one of the things that they're talking about, being able to help someone take information and immediately apply it to their context so that they're able to use it on their own, because it's helping create stronger connections and doing it more than once, right? So not just when they are watching the video and pausing to like fill out a sentence starter where they fill in certain pieces, like what is specific for this particular email, or what would make my particular audience curious about this specific problem. That makes things strong enough for them to be able to pull that information out, remember how they applied it, and then think about how they can apply it to other contexts. So the difference here really is that shallow encoding is what we get from passive consumption. I remember learning about this. Deeper encoding that's active and targeted is I can take what I remember and do it. And so we need to integrate our information and our tasks in order to have those connections built so that they can do the change that they came to do. So what should this look like in the real world? We want clients to learn the concept, apply it immediately, get feedback, refine their understanding, right? So it's kind of like a cycle of working memory, holding the concept long enough to use it, applying it, brings in that active processing, and helps us transfer to long-term memory. Our memory helps solidify that connection between the information and how to use it. Feedback helps redirect misunderstandings before they become a problem. And the learning strategies aren't kind of like just add-ons, they're how the curriculum is built. Okay, I am going to do an example comparison now. So we're going to look at kind of the learn first, do later model compared to the integrated model. So you can see lesson 1, what is a learning objective? So we're imagining I'm teaching you how to teach. That's just information. Lesson 2, types of learning objectives. That's just information. Lesson 3, how to write learning objectives. Still just information. Lesson 4, examples of learning objectives. Still just information. This video is largely just information. I have not yet asked you to do anything. Then an activity at the end of module where you ask them to highlight key points from lesson 1 to 4, then write 5 learning objectives in the workbook. So they have watched 4 lessons, can't remember the criteria, highlighting was random, and now they can't do the dang thing. Where the integrated model might have lesson 1, what is a learning objective? Write a rough draft of a learning objective. Feedback, does it describe an action? That's an immediate check. And that can be feedback from me, right, as the person teaching them, or it can be how to self-check, right? Self-checks are a great way to do feedback. Lesson 2, refining objectives, revising that draft. And the feedback would be on, is it specific and measurable? Again, that's an immediate check, whether it's you or they're doing a self-check. Lesson 3, common mistakes. I think you're getting the idea. The result, right? They read the information or watched the information. They wrote, they got feedback, they revised. The information has been transferred through the application because the strategies are built into the structure, right? That is the key difference. When they're built in, they can't move forward without doing the thing. They can't skip the workbook entirely. The doing happens while the information is still in their working memory. But if it's kind of just an add-on, then the doing happens after they have already started to lose some of the information. So the rest of this series is about how to design that integrated learning in your course. We're going to talk cognitive load. We're going to talk chunking. We're going to sprinkle in a little instructional design theory in ways that you'll be able to do something with it. We're going to talk about ways to help strengthen those connections so people can use the things that you're trying to teach them. And all of it only works if we've got knowledge and action happening together. So the first step is to stop asking, what do they need to know? And instead ask, what do they need to do? When we start there, we automatically are starting to build curriculum in a way where they're actively using information. Because when we know what they need to do, we can start thinking about, okay, well, what knowledge do they need to do the thing? Not what knowledge do we think that we need to impart on them, right? As always, this isn't about you. If you're looking for this kind of structure to help you validate your course, I'm going to be running a challenge on that. There's a link in the description to get on the waitlist. And in next week's video, I'm going to be breaking down how to break things down, right? So that people can actually learn the information in ways that they can apply it. If it's not there, it'll be there next week.